Welcome to Chapter 1, Part 5, Picturing Distributions with Graphs. We're working still with the example from Part 4, the blood type example. In the last video, we did the frequency distribution and relative frequency distribution, and then we created a bar graph in Minitab using the commands that you see right here. I would like to go in and show you how you can change things around once the graph is made. You just click on, if you wanted to change the title, you just click on that title, and you can change the font that you use or even the text that you have in there. So if I wanted a larger font, let's say that I wanted a different font. So now I've got that. So you can change those things around. So I showed you how to make a bar chart or bar graph using the commands. Let's see how you could use the drop-down tabs up here. So if I want a graph and I want to make a bar graph, they call it a bar chart, I could do that. And then I say there are unique counts, and I hit OK, and I want it to be simple. Now I need to tell where it's from. Well, we only have one column, so we click on that, and that's the one we want to do the bar graph on. Now, if I do nothing else and do OK, Minitab's going to give its default graph. The default graph that you're going to see is going to be a frequency bar graph. But as you see, the one that I created, I wanted a relative frequency bar graph. So how could we change all this? And how can we change the titles to make them more meaningful? Now, the blood type, that's fine, and then the different blood types, A, B, B, and O, that's fine. But I don't like the title. In Stat 250, we're going to be very particular that when you do the titles to graphs, it will always look like distribution of. So always, it's going to have to be distribution of the blood types. And you could even be more specific for sample 50, so you know it's out of 50 people. That gives a little more information, can never hurt. Then, I don't want to have counts, I want percents. How do I do that? Well, if you right-click on your mouse, you'll have this. You'll get this selection panel. And I want to go into the graph options. Now, I can do a Pareto chart by going to increasing Y. So in other words, I could change it from smallest to largest. That could be one thing I could do to this graph. That would make it a Pareto chart. Just a quick little aside right there. Let's go back. I want to go back and make it percent instead of count. And if you look down there, it says show Y as a percent. We don't want it as an accumulated Y across X. We just want to show Y as a percent. You're going to see along the vertical axis there, instead of seeing counts, it's going to be a percent. So hit OK, and we now have the percent. So we now have a relative frequency bar graph going on here. Now, I would highly suggest for all of you to get into Minitab and start playing around with things in Minitab. You'll find your own niche and your own way to do things, which is very easy, but you do need some practice on it. And you're going to be making bar and pie charts for your Minitab 1, so this is great practice for you. So in that Minitab A in Blackboard, in your Minitab Examples folder, when you make this bar graph, remember, you need to have meaningful titles and labels. You substitute the correct words that's appropriate for the problem that's being solved for the items that are in italics here below. So you're always going to do for the title, you're going to say distribution of. What's the variable? In this particular example, it's blood type. For, and describe the items with 50 patients. On the horizontal axis, you want to do a description of the variable, and that's where we said would be blood type. Now the vertical axis, if we're doing a frequency bar graph, then would be the number of patients that would have that particular blood type, and the relative frequency would be proportion of described items, so the proportion of patients that would have that particular blood type. So let's go into Minitab and change those things. So now we've got our relative frequency bar graph. So distribution of blood type for the sample of 50. Oops. And I want to go in there and change S to capital S. So again, that's all you do is you double click on there, and you can get in there and change. And again, you could change the font if you wanted to. Blood type, that's fine, but I want to change percent and add a little more meaning to it. And I want to say, so patients, not patients, proportion of patients. And I hit OK. And now I have a very well labeled graph. People will know exactly what we're talking about. And it's and in fact in here you could even be more clear by saying instead of sample of 50, 50 what? 50 patients. So we have a really good graph here, and that tells whoever's looking at it, gives lots of information, and they don't have to ask us a lot of questions. Now, on the PowerPoints in Blackboard, you're going to see all the different commands that we did right here today. So please make sure you visit there to see what we did and the result that you will see after you do these commands. And this one, although it's the frequency table, the tally command, it talks about the subcommands like we did in the last presentation. Now, we're not going to do a command that does side-by-side bar graphs, but here is just looking at how different graphs can be represented, these bar graphs, where you can do comparison between the year 1990 and the year 2003. So you can get a lot of information off of this chart without reading anything. I know that we're talking about educational attainment in these 2 years. So in 1990, I'm going to see the educational attainment in the year 2003, and then we have a clear ledger over here to the right as to which one represents 1990 and which one represents 2003. So we can get the relative frequency, or if we multiplied each of those by 100, the percent of how many people had less than a 9th grade education. Well, in 1990, a little over, tiny bit over 1%, or 10% rather, had less than a 9th grade in educational attainment. But in 2003, that decreased. So we see that there's a decrease in people with less than a 9th grade education. So one would say, oh, well, maybe we're getting a little more educated. So you could look at this and read a graph and get a lot of information off of graphs. Very good to know. Now we're going to go a little more into the pie chart. We talked about it already. And if you had to make it, how would you do it? Well, let's look at this less than 9th grade educational attainment. We see that 0.0663%, or 0.0663 was our relative frequency, or 6.63% of the people had less than a 9th grade education. How would we make a pie chart? Well, do you see the degree measure of each sector? How did that 24 come about? Well, you multiply that relative frequency, the 0.0663, times 360, because there's 360 degrees in a circle. So 24 degrees, a 24-degree angle, if you make that slice in your pie, that would be the less than 9th grade education attainment. For a high school diploma, where 32% of the students had a high school diploma, we'd say 0.3202 times 360. That gives us 150. So that's our biggest angle. So that's going to be our largest slice of the pie. So that's how we would get that. So we're going to stop here. And then in the next segment, we're going to talk about pie charts more and how we would do those in Minitab. Well, I'll see you next time in Part 6.